Yo, what's up? It's someone that's someone, and welcome back to another story mix. Today, we're going into a variety of inhalants. Inhalants are often regarded as quick one-off highs. Many people don't dive too deep with them beyond nitrous. And while we do have a nitrous report in this video, the world of inhalants extends far beyond that. Many inhalants can be found in common household items, to some coming from industrial sources. Glue is probably the most common thing that would be considered an inhalant. But we'll be getting into other things such as paint thinner and computer air duster. But some are willing to go beyond this, especially if they catch an addiction with an inhalant. Other stories we'll be getting into include inhaling things such as gasoline and even propane. I'm sure you can imagine inhaling the chemicals from these things is extremely dangerous, and these stories here detail what the user may experience and why they may come back. But before we get into this, I do want to know, many of these were taken from back in the day. We had to remove them due to the YouTube guidelines, and this is one of the most convenient ways to present them without doing it one by one, so expect the quality to vary. Let me know what you guys want to see next. If you enjoyed this, you already know, hit the like button and subscribe. It's been someone that's someone. Without further ado, let's dive right into this.
It's like nitrous times infinity. A very long time ago, I told myself that I'd never do any drug besides weed. Weed made me happy, weed was relatively easily attainable, and I thought I'd never have the need for anything more than that. I was wrong. I am now in my second semester of college, and I'm just starting my experimental phase. And the current thing I'm experimenting with is inhalants. Yeah, I know this is bad, and especially after the inhalant of which this report is concerned with, I fully plan to stop as soon as I can, because I have a feeling that it's probably pretty bad for both my brain and body. But man, these things are fun. Anyway, I've tried nitrous whippets, my fave, and a couple other things, but I just read earlier today that the canned air computer dusters can be used to get fucked up. I will warn you that as nitrous is my fave and probably the most popular, I will be comparing the effects of the duster to those of nitrous just because that is the only thing that even comes close to it that I've done. So I trotted out to my local Circuit City and obtained a can of Interact brand Air Blaster. It was about $8 including tax. If it matters, the chemical components section of the label says 1112 tetrafluoroethane with a CAS number of 811-97-2, whatever that means. Today's search for inhalants was started because my entire CD book thingy was stolen sometime last night, about 40 to 50 CDs that I've collected over several years. Needless to say, I was pretty pissed and wanted something to raise my spirits. Being out of nitrous and low on funds, I decided to try the duster thing. So I went out, purchased it, and came directly home. Not wanting to freeze my lungs, as had been mentioned in a couple other reports, I just used my trusty nitrous balloon to inhale from. I filled it with about the same amount of duster stuff as normally comes out of a whippet, so I could see the difference in effects from roughly the same dosage of each. Using the same method as I used nitrous, exhale completely, then inhale the balloon slowly and hold my breath as long as possible, I huffed the duster from the balloon, and the results were absolutely breathtaking. As I was breathing it in, I noticed a very faint burning sensation in my throat, and it tasted faintly like the way rubbing alcohol smells. Then the effects started hitting me. They came on faster and harder than nitrous ever had. Everything in my field of vision started getting bright, flashy spots all over it. Everything looked like I was looking at it on a TV with the contrast turned way up. Light things were way lighter, dark things were way darker. The music I was listening to seemed to come from a very long ways away, even though the speakers are right behind my head. Every sound and movement was kind of echoey and vibraty, just like nitrous, but it was so much more intense. In one person's nitrous report, they compared this effect to helicopters. Yeah, that is a pretty accurate portrayal, but it sounded like I had an entire army of helicopters coming from inside my head. Then, everything started spinning and flying as if I was underwater doing an infinite number of backflips, and that is the last definite separate effect that I remember. It was just a combination of the flashy lights and echoes/vibrations and falling forwards, and all sounds coming from a million miles away, and it stayed like that for at least 2 or 3 minutes, much longer than Nitrous. Finally, I started to come down, with all the effects gradually subsiding. I did 2 more balloons of the same amount after that, total 3 balloons, within about 15 minutes. It is now about an hour after I did the last one. Things still feel kinda not right occasionally, but it's nothing to be really worried about, I hope. My eyes feel dry and like there's more pressure behind them than normal. Only a very minor headache that seems to be decreasing as I write this, and my throat/lungs feel surprisingly normal considering how the stuff tasted and felt going down. I have no plans to do any more today, though I will probably eventually finish off the can with either myself or with a friend. And after that, I'm going to try very hard not to get any more and just go back to Nitrous, since I'm sure this stuff is pretty evil in the long run.
As the spirit wanes, the form appears. This is an account of several trips with inhalants. Philosophical babble. I took my philosophy degree at the university with the theme Creativity and Language. At the time I was finished, I was convinced that creativity appears as a shift of a form or an image from one common use in a language system to a new one, and the process is not logical, as being capable to describe all the steps, but appears as a sudden jump. That jump is a synthesis not made consciously. For example, I took a bath and I watch as the water flows on my watch. I suddenly come up with the new idea to draw a liquid watch. I've read Jung's works on archetypes and decided that the best way to find out if archetypes existed and had something to do with creativity is to try to experience them. The obvious choices were hallucinogens. I decided to use acetone after I've read an article about it. First trip. There I was sitting with a tub of glue and a plastic bag. All my work had never prepared me of what I was about to experience. After several huffs, the sound started to repeat in a loop. And there it was, arisen from deep inside of me, an ancient being, and it looked at the world around, took a deep breath, and laughed. It was happy to live again. In Jung's concepts, this would seem to be the shadow. It is important to make the notice that at the time, I have not read the Jung publications about the various archetypes, only a general account of what an archetypical image is. I, on the other hand, was afraid that I was caught in an endless helix. But the shadow said, "No problem, we are in a loop universe. No worry. Here you'll meet yourself and leave yourself." And it started talking to me how different types of drugs catch people in different persons, the persona. The trip was over in 15 minutes. Second trip. Next day I decided to continue. The shadow again welcomed me. It was more clear in image this time. It had a nice sense of humor, the trickster or the fool. It resembled at the same time a fool or a very organized man. It was not within me, but as a different persona. As the trip was getting to its end, all the hallucinations centralized as an upside-down echo that returns to its center or maker. The trip was 30 minutes. Third trip. This was more extreme. I was listening to Björk at the time. The shadow showed me an empress or a goddess, the anima. I've read the chapter on the anima, but it concerned mostly females, so again it appeared by itself, not from what I've read. Of course, the song of Björk was the raw material with which the image developed. The goddess is very fair and cruel. Anyone who tries to marry or kiss her dies. Only a magician can trick her, said the shadow. I am a magician, said I. Oh, you fancy yourself a trickster. Can you reach me? Can you kiss me? Echoes the voice of the goddess from above. Yes, I can, said I. Then 2 ghosts appeared, red and blue. They manifest in reality only with an automatic gesture or a phrase. They are at war with each other. Wins by whoever manages to express himself the most in the world, said the shadow. The empress said, there are different levels of being. A simple phrase repeated is one, a gesture another, much like a human being, but it lives in the lives of others without considering consequences.
The flesh is a thought put into a fact. A thought passes within and through flesh to become a fact. It's both the lowest and the highest. A free thought is such that needs no flesh to appear, said both the queen and the fool as a choir. With their words I saw colors, abstract shapes, and geometric forms. The biggest pain is to live with consequences, was the final echo from the drug. This trip was 40 minutes long. Before the fourth trip, I discovered the formal resemblance between hallucinations and mythology and fairy tales. I decided to use some method of magic to concentrate myself within the trip. I read extensively through different mythological texts. I had an important dream. Horus appeared as a number, both 3 and 4. Again, I read about the mythological meaning of the numbers afterwards. At the time I awoke, the only thing I could put up was that they equal 7. The fourth trip. I sit on my knees and try to focus. I'm like Alice in Wonderland changing size. The shadow appears and shifts to a monk who will teach me now. He shows me an image of a flower on the flower. This is the most important thing, said he. Afterwards, I read about Mandela and how it corresponds to the blossoming flower of the rose. This trip was 40 minutes. Fifth and last trip. The goddess in the shadow present me in a grand golden amphitheater. There are all the gods from all the grades and levels of being. You have been chosen to be an emperor, said a golden figure. Old man sitting in a throne. The old man. I can't. Look at me. I'm nobody, said I. Stop acting as a spoiled child. You have been chosen. You've passed all the tests. A choir of all beings echoes. The trip lasted 2 hours. At that point, I was afraid of the megalomaniac structure of the hallucinations and stopped experimenting. Conclusion. The archetypical origin of the hallucinations was quite obvious, but there were a lot more than a display of old mythological figures. The way different ideas were presented with shapes and colors was a proof of my concept about creativity. At last, there was one thing which lies beyond my logical means of explaining. These experiences changed my conscious perception of the world and myself. The only way to describe them now is a synthesis between spiritual and rational thoughts, in the broadest possible meaning of these two words. Another world. I was bored one night and I was sitting at home, had nothing to do. I've smoked weed for a year already, and I also tried LSD once. That's about it. So I decided to try some. I was sitting alone in my room. I took one hit and became very dizzy. Then took another hit and my vision was all spinning. I was hearing a loop. Took one more hit and I saw people all over it telling me to inhale more. Took another hit and I saw a boxing ring with Mickey Mouse standing in it. I'm like, what the fuck? Another hit and my heart started beating extremely fast. My vision started all going gray. Then my heart stopped beating. I couldn't breathe. I fell on my bed. Then I stood up and saw a friend, who wasn't there, run to phone an ambulance. I was chasing him. Then I told him I'm okay, but he didn't hear me. I couldn't see his face at all. It had shade all over it. I didn't know who it was. So yeah, I ran up to him and I tried to grab the phone, but I couldn't. It was like it was air. He threw the phone down and ran out the house. I tried to follow him, but once again, I couldn't open the door. He ran back in my room, and as I followed him, I saw myself lying on the bed passed out, not even breathing. He started trying to wake me up. Then when I felt my body again, I stood up and I didn't see anyone. But the thing that freaked me out was that I had fucking marks on my body and shirt as if someone touched me for real. From this trip, I now believe that there's another world with ghosts, and God himself saved my life when I was lying dead on the bed. Gasoline. Hate to love it, love to hate it. It started at a friend's house around a bonfire at night. The night was clear and a freeway was nearby. This was my first experience with gas. We had a cloth dosed in gas and passed it around. There were 3 of us, including me. The first hallucination was with the sound I was hearing, a wah-wah effect included with every sound. Not fast though, 1 wah about every couple of seconds. I felt good, but my mental state had been changed somehow. I was still alert, thinking this was the end of our fun. Said, hell, if this is it, then let's do more. I was way wrong. This is only the beginning. Couple more huffs, put more gas, then huff some more. The wah seemed to be the only sound left. Began to lose sense of reality, space, and time. Anything and everything I knew did not matter, not in a careless sense, just that the stress of existence was hidden due to the amazing trip I was in. In my mind, I was trying to figure this shit out. What I came up with does not make much sense now, but it did at the time. I somehow came up with this. The longer I held my breath, the faster I would race. I will elaborate. The stars were the checkpoint and the cloth was the contestant. Not human, just an inanimate object that had a personality. The rotation of the cloth as we passed it sparked a starting point, and suddenly I would shoot off into the stars, riding the lights from the cars on the freeway in my peripherals. Next star, next star, next star, and I feel the wind hit me, and as I race, colors would swarm around me in mathematical synchronization. Then slowly, as I came down, I found that I was running with my legs, sitting in a chair, saying, "I'm on a galaxy!" over and over again. The wah was replaced with a chiming sound like a Tinkerbell type sound. When it all ended, my mind felt like it was waiting, like a cursor in the middle of typing, but just sitting there, waiting. My friends laughed at me for my trip. We packed up and called it quits. The next day I returned to his house, but he had to leave for the moment. He said I could watch TV or whatever, so I did, while huffing. So, as I was alone, I began to feel light and my peripherals faded away so that all I saw was the TV. Many others report a déjà vu. Here's mine. In my mind, I had a thought that the cloth in my hand, to someone not knowing about huffing, could be construed as I'm masturbating and that's the cloth. Immediately after that thought, I think, what if someone walks in the room and my amazement of the déjà vu would give off a reaction to certify the first thought for someone? Then after that thought, I hallucinated it in reverse. Weird reaction certifying the misunderstanding, then the misunderstanding itself, then the person involved backing out of the room, closing the door. Once the door closed, it opened right back up, person walks in, sees me and the cloth, and I sat up really fast from the crazy déjà vu, which is the certainty for the person that I was masturbating. He says ill and leaves the room as I try to explain. Turns out that that person is actually my friend's brother. After that, my curiosity for this drug grew immensely. I wanted to know how, why, what does it mean, etc., and pursued to find out how I did it. Then months later, a separate friend of mine and I were trying to get some bud, but was all dry. So as I passed his dirt bike, it clicked. From this point, I regret all of it. I show him, and we settle ourselves down in the living room using a cloth like I had before. I put music on that has a low, heavy beat. I literally see transparent sound waves come from the sub. Then because of my know-it-all attitude and the already growing curiosity for more, my mind simplified it with gas must enhance the senses, which aided in my want for huffing. I continued. After a bit, a section of the music played backwards, the beat, the lyrics completely backwards. I know the song so well I knew better, but your mind believes it, so I start the song over, no huffing, and it's fine. I know I didn't skip it, it was MP3. I then make the comment in my mind that gas might change the chemistry of your brain. Did not want to believe it though, because I was hooked on these hallucinations that aren't just visual. I had them in my head, heard them, felt them, and interacted with them. Later that night, I hinted to my friend that things might be different at night, remembering my first time. They were way different. Even more than the first time. We sat in the back of a truck and gazed off into the stars. After about 5 minutes, we both report to each other that it feels as though we are zooming towards the stars we are looking at. When I looked away or to another star, it would start over, so I continued to focus on one star. As I zoomed off to the star, wind hits my face, which gives a tunnel effect, and all the other stars formed around the one star. I always avoided the stars that fell in between the power lines because of the fact that I might get shocked as I zoom off. I forced myself to do so after a while, and as I go through the power lines, they felt as though they stretched across my face like cheese cutter wire. We did this trip so often, we coined a phrase for it, rising up. Because of the moonlight, it created an awesome contrast of shadows and dim light, which was perfect for complete hallucinations in a world of hallucinations. I call this being on a galaxy. I also became giddy at the time and looking over the rail of the truck and looked down at the dirt and pebbles. A comic strip emerges, not in whole though, scene for scene, and my eyes knew where to look for the next scene. There were 4 scenes constructing one cartoon dog picking up a rock and smacking another unsuspecting cartoon dog on the head. The detail was that of a cartoon, and I found it to be very funny. After that, I looked over to my friend and his hood was over his face. He was groaning. You would think that my response to that is, "Are you okay?" But no, I somehow idolized that he was in a tunnel of colors and could not get out of this trip. After watching him for a couple of minutes, I gently rubbed from his forehead to his chin, narrowing the tunnel to bring it to a stop. I did it about 4 times before he asked what I was doing, in which I replied, "I'm helping you out of the tunnel." He agreed with me and thanked me. I think now, how did I know? But then I knew what I knew, and that was that. Weeks and weeks go by of this pattern with the hallucinations, generally related to each other with the occasional oddball. My friend fell out of the excitement, but I pressed on, determined to figure it all out. I began to feel my mindset give. Random thoughts, and I mean random, swarm my mind uncontrollably. I believe that this is because too much blood is going to my head, and the way to stop it is to hold my neck of the blood. Doesn't work, but after sitting through it, it goes away. To this day, after not huffing for about 3 years, I can still feel it in my mind and the way my visuals are perceived. My mind seems to be much slower in processing these visuals, and if I am tired and in a dark area, transparent hallucinations can be seen. I know what I've done to my mind is irreversible. The extent of my trips proceed. I am in fact an entity reborn in a human body to protect the stars. My name, Gachio, and I must relearn my abilities during the day and fight at night. I began to control my trips to an extent. I lifted an RV off the ground with my mind, and when I let it down, it bounced like it really would from that height. I could ride down the power lines into the sky and move stars with my hand. When I wasn't huffing, I felt irritable and angry. Every night, though, I would go out for at least 3 hours to trip or hold up my name of protection. Gradually, I would earn my abilities, but once in a while, no matter how much I huffed, no trip. Must be a chemistry thing. And then it finally ended. I can't trip anymore, no matter what. So here I write, gas can stop your heart. I am very lucky to be alive, but I must live with the possibility of cancer. Brain, lung, who knows? But gas goes through all of that and more. Never huff anything. I regret all of what I've done, even though I said at the time, gas is awesome and I never quit. I feel the negative effects now and gas isn't worth it. I think I may have developed a minor case of dyslexia when reading or writing, and even sometimes when I speak. I cannot express how dangerous inhalants are, but for what I have expressed, I hated loving it. Now, I love hating it. Ringing in the new year. Recently I got my hands on 48 whippets of nitrous oxide, and after my plans for tonight fell through, I decided to ring in the new year, it's December 31st right now, with a bit of a dissociative voyage, which I was hoping would culminate in a mystical experience. Before I left, I used one cartridge to loosen up and get a more positive mindset. After that wore off, I drove out to an isolated area and would, over the next 3 or 4 hours, go through 8 more hits of nitrous. This is my first experience with taking more than 1 hit of nitrous in a short period of time, and using it for its dissociative properties rather than its euphoric ones. As I went through the next 2 hits, I experienced strong dissociation comparable to a high dose of DXM without some of the other effects, for those of you who have been down that road. Still, nothing truly meaningful happened. I went for a walk and noticed as I was walking that although it had been several minutes since I had taken the first hits, I was still a bit depersonalized. After I got back from my walk, I took a few more, 2 or so, hits of nitrous. The dissociation was even stronger this time, and though I was trying to relax and let the entheogen do what it pleased with my mind, there was still nothing meaningful happening inside my head. What happened next is very interesting in my opinion. As I got up for another brief walk, my sense of touch was strobing, much as vision does with some substances, but different from the way sound does with nitrous. Never had I heard of anybody's sense of touch doing this, but mine definitely was. I burst out laughing. I would know where my hand was, on a rail for example, but it would be half a second or so before I could actually feel my hand on the rail. My whole body was completely numb, but for some reason walking wasn't terribly difficult. After a few minutes later, after walking around for a bit, I sat down for another 2 hits of nitrous, and this is where the experience became a bit more spiritual. I turned on some music from my iPod, something by the band called Orgy. With the next hit, I felt the same dissociation as I had with the previous doses, but this time I became aware of what I can only describe as oblivion. Oblivion was absolutely enormous, and everything I knew seemed ridiculously small in comparison. After a minute or so of this, I opened my eyes and I can hardly describe to you how strange everything seemed. It was like being in an alien world, only I was still here on Earth. One more inhale and life began to seem meaningless. Everything I knew was so small and short-lived. All the Earth could not make a ripple big enough to disturb a guppy as it searches for whatever it is a guppy eats. Each hit seemed to be building on the last one. Once more I took a walk and then sat down for about 2 more inhales. The experience this time was a bit more positive and uplifting. I believe it may have had to do something with the music I was listening to. Much of Orgy's music is rather harsh and critical, but this time I had some upbeat classic rock. Although I kept in mind at all times just how small and insignificant everything was, these next 2 boosts seemed to have a bit more optimism in them. All worrying seemed pointless, and I felt a connection to things all around me, and since they are, as a whole, more important than I am. All in all, I hope I can keep these things in mind as I go through my life. It would be quite helpful to someone as worrisome as me. I apologize for not being able to tell exactly how many inhales I took in any of my 4 sittings. I had not decided in advance to keep track, and the effects of the drug may have impaired my ability to remember such things even further. Also, it is interesting that when I am looking to experience the euphoria of nitrous oxide, all I need to do is hope for it to come, and it will. Out of all the things I have consumed, which includes morphine and other opiates known for euphoria, nothing compares to the orgasmic surge of pleasure which runs through my whole body when I take a hit hoping for good feelings. Tonight, however, there was little euphoria, only a feeling of my body extending outwards infinitely until it seemed to encompass everything, and this is what I have focused on in the report. The main reason I chose to submit this report is the way my sense of touch strobed. I've never heard of this before, and thought it would be something important to document. Oh, I almost forgot. Happy 2008. It does get you high. I feel the need to document and share an experience I had after sniffing Tester's paint thinner back around 1978 when I was 14 years of age. This was a dark period of my life, and I was often bored, lonely, and depressed. Before my one experience with paint thinner, I had sniffed model glue or airplane glue on several occasions. I built plastic model cars, planes, and ships to pass the time. As a result, I had a model glue, the Tester's brand, in addition to the paint thinner and assorted paints. I would squeeze the glue into a plastic bag, cover my mouth and nose, and inhale. The highs I got from glue were never very intense and left me with a 15-minute dizzy drunk feeling. The high I got from Tester's paint thinner was quite the contrary. I wanted to get high before going to school one morning. I had no access to common recreational drugs such as pot, and I was curious if the paint thinner would affect me if I inhaled it. I read the label on the small glass vial. The label listed mineral spirits as one of the ingredients. If mineral spirits are anything like alcohol spirits, I thought, then this paint thinner may very well get me high just as good, if not better, than glue. I poured a good portion of the thinner into a white plastic shopping bag. I then sat at the edge of my bed, put the bag over my nose and mouth, leaned over, and inhaled. I breathed deeply at a slow, rhythmic rate. I remember first seeing the white of the inflated bag as I continued to breathe and hearing the warm air pass in and out of my mouth, causing the bag to make a light crumpling noise as it expanded and contracted. About a minute later, the sound of my breath as I inhaled transformed into several voices singing a musical scale, similar to Do, Re, Mi, Fa, So. When I exhaled, the voices sang down in pitch in a similar fashion. Surprised by this auditory hallucination, I halted my breath and breathed very slowly, only to discover that the voices continued singing the scales, also more slowly, as if my breath was the voice's source. Even though the bag was small and about a foot long or so, I felt as if it was stretching down to the carpet with every exhalation, then springing back up. I closed my eyes, then became transformed to a dreamlike state where I was looking down onto the top of a spinning merry-go-round, similar to what I used to see in playgrounds back then. It looked so much like a kaleidoscope with toy balls and blocks moving around on the top. For a minute, I was completely removed from reality as I remained amused by the merry-go-round show. A feeling of shock and surprise came over me when I realized that what I was seeing was not real and I was still in my bedroom and needed to leave for school. I lifted my head from my bag and peered at my wall. I saw fractalized patterns on the wall similar to a hound's tooth textile pattern. Everything I looked at was fractalized in that manner, and I could not make out any smooth edges. I noticed my mouth was numb. I began to feel frightened because I had no idea what I had done to myself. I knew of nobody else who tried paint thinner, and I felt as if I was going into unexplored territory. I became fearful that my whole body was going to go numb. Alone in my house, and frightened, I ran downstairs out of our home towards the bus stop. I felt a great spring-like sensation as I ran to the bus stop. It felt as if my lower legs were made out of springs and that I bounced high with every step. This sensation gave me a sense of exhilaration and helped to quell my fear. I looked at the green trees on the horizon, and they too were fractalized into hound's tooth patterns. This was quite bizarre looking. I felt relieved when I got to the bus stop and near the other students, although I don't remember speaking to any of them. I do not remember much after this. I began to feel back to normal as I completed my 15-minute bus ride to junior high school, and by the time I got to my first class, I had came down completely. This short trip lasted only about a half hour. It would have been more enjoyable if I knew what to expect and had others' personal experiences to compare to. The body, auditory, and visual distortions I experienced were quite strong and comparable to LSD, which I tried in my early 20s. They were not, however, overwhelming to the point of causing unease. I stopped doing all inhalants shortly after this experience because I felt the health risk to both my mind and body were too great.